Hello, folks. We're back today doing another video about the Scott Davis, conviction. We are going to talk a bit about today about some of the key pieces of this case, where the key people in this case, where the investigation really kind of started to go snafooey. We're also going to kind of go through the timeline of events here. So right now what we're looking at is we're looking at David Coffin, the victim in this case. We're looking at his Porsche. His Porsche was found on the day that all this started on December 10th of 1996. This Porsche was found burning at 11:28 a.m. So what we're looking at here now is the gas can that was found nearby the Porsche that was used to douse it with gasoline to burn it the way you saw it all burned up there. And the prosecution maintained that this gas can belonged to Scott Davis and that it was his or whatever. But the problem is with that is that this didn't look like the gas can that Scott Davis used. It is a very common gas can that's sold at pretty much I guess commonly at a lot of the gas stations and stuff in that area. But it's like the one that Megan used to have in her car. So that's just an interesting little fact. And we'll now move into the next bit of the case here. Now we skip forward to the very, very late night hours, basically midnight of December 10th, or, basically 12 a.m. in the morning of December 11th. It's kind of important to point that out because at that point it becomes two different days, so it can get a little confusing when you're referring to dates. But anyways, at that point in time, this is David Coffin's house in flames. And while this is happening some ways away at Scott Davis's house has been set fire. Fortunately, Scott was there and got downstairs and was able to put it out before it got too serious. All right, and here we see some of the fire damage at Scott's house, which, like I said, this is all happening the same night, all just like at the same time, all on top of each other, really. So well, number one, it makes it very difficult for Scott to have been in both places. He certainly couldn't have been at the Porsche when it was burning because he was at work. He was in an office building with two people that could verify he was there. So that was impossible. So the prosecution just made up an accomplice that they could not prove or show any kind of substance that he existed. All right, so then that leads us to this guy, Detective Chambers, the co-lead detective on the case. Detective Chambers goes to Scott's house. They talk to Scott. They ask Scott to go in to their office or whatever to make a statement. So this happens. When Scott goes in to make a statement, they want to question him. So they take him into a questioning room. Well, eventually they're questioning him pretty hard or whatever, but he's trying to be cooperative and everything. And he eventually ends up saying that because they're grilling him, he says, "Hey, look, I didn't shoot the guy." Well, he said that because Megan said that to him. This detective knows that she said it first. He knows that. The reason why he knows that is because there are witnesses that were telling him, but he was ignoring it. So now we will move into Megan Bruton and why this situation and how this situation is basically connected between these two and how these two are so responsible. Okay, so you heard what I was saying about Scott when he was in the interview room and they were grilling him and everything, and he says to them, "Look, hey, I didn't shoot the guy." Well, the reason why he had that information is because Megan had the information. This is proven, and I'm actually going to show you testimony in this video that is absolutely true. She knew before anybody, and the testimony that I'm going to show you in this video, you're going to see that she passed the information to Scott. The person actually was standing by listening when she passed that information to Scott. So, you know what that makes her? That's right, friends. She is a suspect, and yet she was ignored. That's one of the hallmarks of a wrongful conviction, by the way, people. Ignoring the obvious suspects, the suspects closest to the victim. She was ignored completely. And, like I said, the proof pointed to the fact that she knew the information she should know about David being shot. Actually, in the head. They heard her saying in the head when her friends, when she was telling her friends. And I mean, she had that information before anybody. That's been proven now. If you look at one of my other videos, they even show the phone records. They show it. They show it all, where they prove it definitively that she had that information first and fed it to Scott. So that's just something everybody should know here. It's a very disturbing fact. And like I said, this is our co-lead detective who virtually ignored her, even though he had cause to think of her as a suspect, but he didn't. He completely ignored her. He completely bought anything she said, pretty much hook, line, and sinker. Just horrendous. So we're going to now get into some of his testimony in pretrial here. And we're going to see kind of the way he is. I mean, the way he is on the stand is just ridiculous. He is evasive and basically tries to dodge questions. Even the prosecutor tries to protect him by objecting and stuff to try to protect him from certain things. It's kind of comical. But so we're going to see some of his testimony here and kind of a little bit of how ridiculous he is. And at some point during the early morning hours of that morning, you focused on Scott Davis as the perpetrator of this coffin homicide, didn't you? Yes, sir. And since December 10th of 1996, you have either been the lead detective or co-lead detective on this case, correct? Yes, sir. You gathered evidence? Yes, sir. Interviewed witnesses? Yes, sir. In fact, you obtained the original arrest warrant in December of 1996? Yes, sir. And you prepared and presented the affidavit for a wiretap warrant in April of 2005? Yes, sir. You are a detective who spearheaded the wiretap in Palo Alto, California in April of 2005. Yes, sir. You conducted interviews in Palo Alto, California in the conjunction with that wiretap. Yes, sir. You held a press conference. Yes, sir. And you were the detective who arrested Scott Davis in November of 2005. Yes, sir. So it's been your case since the early morning hours of December 10th, 1996. Yes, sir. You went to the home of David Coffin on Conway Valley approximately midnight, just before midnight, correct? Yes, sir. On the 10th? Yes, sir. And Detective Walker was with you from homicide? Yes, sir. Boy, Chambers sure was a busy bee for somebody who couldn't even make sure that the evidence made it to trial. Huh? About 2 o'clock in the morning, and yes. Why did you go to the Battleview house? It had come to our attention that someone had attempted to set Mr. Davis's house on fire and that Mr. Davis had been attacked the day earlier in that day, and being related to Miss Lee, being the estranged husband of Miss Lee, we thought it might be relevant. Relevant to the death of David Coffin? Yes. Who told you this information? Megan told us that she was on the phone with Scott, that he had called and told her someone had tried to set his house on fire. She related that information to us. We in turn asked for the fire department to check, and they were in fact en route to the Battleview. Did you say anything else about what occurred on the telephone conversation? Ms. Ross, at this point, objection to relevance and to the Jackson Deno, Your Honor. Mr. Morris, setting the scene to his getting there and his focusing on the defendant, which is a factor in detention and interrogation. Ms. Ross, this detective's knowledge is not a factor. What is a factor is whether the defendant voluntarily spoke to the detectives. Mr. Morris, I haven't asked anything of substance yet. The court, the objection is overruled. So there you see her stepping in because Morris is asking about the phone call between her and Scott, where when she actually fed Scott the information about David being shot. So she realizes where Morris is going there, and she's quick to jump up and object. Because why? Because Miss Ross knows, okay? She's the prosecutor here, but she knows. She knows that there's accounts saying that Megan told Scott this. They know this. And yet they are deliberately trying to obfuscate or bury or downplay it or discredit it, whatever. They are refusing to look at the obvious here and see what's staring at them right in the face. Because like I said, the blood that they believe belonged to the killer doesn't match Scott. The prints that they believe belonged to the killer didn't match Scott. Did they try to find out who these things belonged to? No, they didn't. Along with the other 72 pieces of evidence that got lost and the defense never got any chance to look at or examine on their own. Scott Davis is quoted as saying, I mean, you have the report to look at. I mean, I just can't, I'm real tired and I've been attacked twice and it's hard for me to sit here and recount every second. Do you recall him saying that? No, sir, I don't. But if it's there, I guess he did. And this is the transcript prepared by the Atlanta Police Department, is it not? It appears to be, yes. Do you have any question about that? No. So, although you don't recall him saying he was tired, if it's reflected in the transcript, you will accept that he did say that. Yes, sir. And you knew he had been attacked twice. Yes. You indeed acknowledged that he is tired. Do you recall that? No, sir. At page 737, according to the bait stamp, after he tells you that he is tired and he's been attacked twice, you say, I know that you are tired. Any doubt that you said that? Miss Ross, would this be page 25, Mr. Morris? Page 25 of Exhibit 3, I believe, yes. Miss Ross, in the middle of the page, answering here, I believe I would be saying, I know, in regards to him saying, I'm going to give you good estimates. You didn't know he was real tired, where he says, I'm real tired, immediately above that? I mean, it says it, yes, sir. You just don't recall that. No. Even though he said that, and it's clear from the transcript, you did not stop interrogating him then, did you? No. In fact, he became your prime suspect. Yes, sir. You tell him you believe he went to Coffin's house on Monday night. Yes, sir. Did I say Monday night? I believe you did. Do you recall that? I'm looking at, what page is that on? It's on page 737, page 29 of Exhibit 3, a third of the way down. Right, correct. Yes, sir. And you tell him that you believe he confronted Coffin and he's been foreseeing his wife. Yes. And then a fight ensues, correct? Yes. And he denies that and you accuse him of lying. Yes, sir. Let me have just a moment. I don't know. I didn't accuse him of lying. I asked him about his $3 cafe trip. Well, let me see if this refreshes your recollection. On page 31, don't you say, okay, let me tell you something. I've been doing this for a lot of years, okay? I've been in the interview and interrogation school, every interview and interrogation school there is, okay? All right. I'm probably one of the top 2 in this office, okay? There are certain things people do when they are telling a lie. You just can't stop it. They can't stop it. They just can't keep from doing it. And that's what I said. Yes, sir. So you were calling him a liar, basically. Yes, sir. At that point, I was. Before you finished the interrogation, you allowed Mr. Davis to be taken home. You took him home. Yes, we drove him home. Yes, myself and Detective Walker. Okay, now remember what I said about Miss Megan here. Miss Megan and how she ties in with Chambers and the way the whole thing knits together in this here. So we're now going to see some testimony that proves Megan had guilty knowledge. We're going to hear from Coffin's best friend now. This is testimony of the victim's good friend, Craig Foster. Did Detective Chambers come ask you any questions during the time you were at the homicide office? I honestly don't know. It's just a blur because, first of all, it was a traumatic experience, and second of all, it was in the middle of the night. And lastly, when we were making our statements, I spoke to this lady, and I think I spoke to Detective Chambers as well, and then he comes to the office a number of times after that, and then I get a number of calls after that, and they all just tend to blend. Did Megan Davis make a statement to you about David Coffin being shot? Miss Ross, objection. I don't see any relevance to that and whether the defendant's statement was freely and voluntarily made. The court, sustained. Mr. Morris, may I state my grounds? The court, yes. Mr. Morris, the detective stated that the main reason he focused on Scott Davis and started his second interrogation was that statement. He said he went outside and asked certain people if that statement was made. Before I could ask him, I was trying not to put the cart before the horse. I can ask directly if he was asked that, but I want to know if he was told that first. Miss Ross, the objection still stands. What Detective Chambers did is not relevant. Mr. Morris, it is. Or what Megan Davis Lee said is not relevant. Whether the defendant's statement was freely and voluntarily made. If he has a question along those lines, any build-up or background for purposes of this hearing is not relevant. Mr. Morris, I am permitted to try to impeach the testimony of Detective Chambers, who is the key witness on the issue of the statement. The court, okay, I'm going to let you ask the question. Pretty simple. 2 questions, sir. Did Megan Davis, before you got to homicide, tell you that David Coffin had been shot? Megan Davis never directly told me that David had been shot. Did you hear her make that statement? I believe I heard that statement. From Megan? Yes. When you were at the homicide office, did Detective Chambers come ask you if Megan had made that statement in your presence? I believe so. And what did you say? That I overheard a statement of that type from Megan Davis. Mr. Morris, thank you, sir. That's all I have, Your Honor. So there we have it, folks. She fed the information to Scott. So here we are, folks. Brings us right back around to Megan being the truly suspicious party here. She had information that she shouldn't have had. There's no way she could have gone into the fire and found out that David had been shot. The only way she could have had that information is if she knew before the fire started. So she has guilty knowledge, and this is not just backed up. Okay, first of all, that's the testimony of David Coffin, the victim's, pretty much his best friend or one of his very good friends. But we also have testimony from Megan's best friend that Megan told her and her husband that that David had been shot while she was at the neighbor's house while the house was still burning. Okay, I mean, you can't deny it. There's 3 people that basically have given testimony and stuff. There's a 4th person who was Craig's girlfriend at the time, who never really testified or anything, but she also was there when he heard Megan have this conversation with Scott, where she said that David had been shot. So that's basically 4 people that can attest to the fact that Megan said this. And then you have the fact that they finally subpoenaed the phone records from where Megan was making these calls, and they pinned down the times of all these calls, and they pinned it down, and they compared it with Scott's phone record and saw when the calls lined up, and it happens exactly the way that these witnesses say, that the calls happened all at the time that they say, and she was telling them about David being shot before she even called Scott. So that's all for today, folks. If you haven't already, please hit subscribe. Look forward to more Scott Davis and also more Making a Murderer videos for me in the future. And everybody have a nice day.